25 years ago, I made a series of films about wine that saw me travel the world, building up into a history, which then became a book. Today, I thought I'd revisit it and cut it up into bite-sized chunks for you to view exclusively online. I hope you enjoyed viewing them as much as I enjoyed making them. We all celebrate with champagne when we can, and some of us really love the taste. It's unlike anything else. But what is it, and how did it come to be so different?
To start with, it's a place, a region northeast of Paris, the northernmost in France to grow wine at all. Its position at the meeting of many roads has made Reims, its capital, one of the great commercial centres since the time of the Romans. In the Middle Ages, its famous cloth fairs were a good outlet and advertisement for its wines. With prosperity and investment, they flourished, until they were famous in Paris, only a few days down the River Marne, for their exceptional lightness, and above all their fragrance. This super quality is inbuilt in both the soil and the climate.
Well, here the soil is chalk, if you can call it soil, white, solid, rocky chalk that you could write on a blackboard with. But it does reflect light onto the vines, which helps the grapes to ripen. The roots go deep in it, the drainage is good. It's wonderful for fine wines, so long as you give the plants something to grow in. You have to enrich the soil year after year and cover it with manure, bring in vegetable matter. The other quality of chalk lies underground.
It's easily dug and carved into spacious cellars, where the temperature never varies, summer or winter. Mile upon mile of cellars under Reims were dug as quarries for building stone by the Romans 2,000 years ago.
Champagne divides into villages that grow black grapes and villages that grow white grapes, both of them to make white wine. And the marriage of these two is the secret of Champagne.
This is the white grape slope, the Côte des Blancs, which faces south behind me, where the village of Avize is one of the best Grand Cru. Over there is Cramont, another famous village. The afternoon sun is flooding the slopes with light, and of course all the grapes are the famous Chardonnay.
It's obvious you can make white wine from Chardonnay, but how do you make white wine from black grapes? With extreme care is the answer. This was one of Dom Perignon's great contributions, to realize that the flavor of Pinot Noir is wonderful in white wine without the tannin from its skin.
A very important part of the business of getting pure white juice out of black grapes is to make sure that they're not rotten and perished. Because if they are, then the grapes will give a pink tinge to the wine, and you've got pink wine instead of white champagne. I've got to get rid of ladybirds like that. In fact, this way of doing it, what's called triage, which is taking away all the rotten berries, was pure Dom Perignon perfectionism. There used to be lines of ladies in the vineyards throwing out every rotten little berry like that, cutting them off, chucking them away. But nowadays, it's much less of a problem than it used to be. You don't get an awful lot of rot. Things get to the press house so much quicker.
The presses that manage to get the juice out without the colour are unique to Champagne. They're huge, 4 tons of grapes at a time. And they press very gently, just enough to burst the berries without crushing the skins.
Vous prenez combien dans la cuvée là?
10 pièces de 205 litres.
Oui.
Only the juice of the first pressing will make top quality wine. 2,000 litres or 10 barrels of it. Juice from the second and third pressings will not be used to make champagne.
Les deuxièmes tailles,
Pas grand-chose.
c'est un jus de seconde qualité.
The secret of champagne, or one of the secrets, is finding the perfect blend of red and white grape wines from the perfect range of vineyard sites. And this is really what Dom Perignon worked on and perfected.
And this is the actual miniature grape press that Dom Perignon used here in the Abbey of Auvilliers to make his experimental little blends. He used grapes from all over the vineyard lands of the Abbey, black grapes and white grapes, and he'd make separate little lots in this press of his, and then he'd blend them together to see what was really going to make an ideal champagne. Auvilliers wine on its own is very, very full-bodied. Now, with a touch of Sillery from another village, you get a bit of lift and liveliness in the wine. Then with a bit of Bouzy, which is from another village in the region, you get what the French call carpentry, which is structure and firmness in your mouth. Then another element has to be some white grape wine from the Côte des Blancs, which rounds the whole thing out harmoniously, gives it a bit of nuttiness and different aromas altogether. Dom Perignon's great achievement, really, was that he made France's best, subtlest wine by developing the art of blending.
One of my favourite episodes of this filming was the chance to go and interview Dom Perignon himself and get something about champagne from the horse's mouth, as it were.
Father Perignon, you were the first person to practice scientific winemaking, what we'd call enology today. You were the first enologist. There are so many legends about you. They say that you were the first person to make sparkling wine. They say that you were the first person to use bottles and corks together. They say you were blind, which I can see you weren't. Above all, they say you had the most remarkable sense of taste. And just by popping a grape in your mouth, you could say definitively whether it was grown on this hill or in that valley. How much of this is true?
Entrepreneurial spirit within the effervescent world of champagne came from some unexpected sources.
The other great legendary figure in the development of champagne was a young woman. Her name was Mademoiselle Nicole Ponsardin, but she's much better known to history as La Veuve Clicquot, the widow Clicquot. And this is a portrait of her in her comfortable old age. I'd love to have known what she looked like when she was younger, because she started her own champagne firm when she was only 27.
Napoleon had just been driven back from his march on Moscow, and the Russian army was bivouacked around Rheims. They were soon looting the widow's cellars. Let them drink, she said. They'll pay later. And they did. She sent salesmen to Moscow and St. Petersburg, and she was, you might say, sitting pretty. From that moment, champagne became an international luxury with a potential world market. The widow's work was largely done underground. She tackled the tricky practicalities of producing champagne on an industrial scale, and there were daunting problems. A large proportion of the bottles exploded, wasting huge quantities of wine. Visitors down here were given iron masks to protect their faces. So strong bottles were needed, and a scientific way of adjusting the pressure inside them. It was done in the end by adding a precise measure of sugar and yeast to produce a calculated amount of carbon dioxide, and of course the alcohol that goes with it.
How to make it reliably fizzy was one problem, but the real devil to solve was how to make it clear. Because when wine ferments in the bottle, it creates thousands of dead yeast cells. And here they are. And altogether, they make it look much more like soup than wine. Look at them drifting around there. Nobody would want to drink stuff like that. History credits the widow Clicquot herself with finding the ideal solution. What she did was she took her kitchen table, and in it she cut holes at an angle of 45 degrees. Now, she stuck the finished bottles of wine down in the holes, and naturally the yeast in the wine started to go down towards the cork. Now, by giving each bottle a twist and a shake every day, she managed to stop the yeast sticking to the glass so that all finally got down resting on the cork. But imagine doing that to tens of thousands of bottles.
This is exactly what these remueurs, or movers, are doing, and they spend a lifetime doing it. A skilled man can twist and shake 30,000 bottles a day. Nearly all champagne firms now have very large machines that can do the same thing, but there's still a mystique about doing it by hand. It's still how top-quality champagne is made.
It's these critical final adjustments that make all the difference to champagne. And once again, the widow Clicquot gets all the credit.
The widow developed a production line for champagne. Once the wine has re-fermented, upside down, and its yeast has been coaxed to rest on its cork, it's ready for disgorging. The dégorgeur pops the cork and out flies the yeasty, cloudy part. The bottle is then topped up with what they call a dosage, which used to be several spoonfuls of sugar dissolved in champagne. The Russians liked it really sticky. Then the second and final cork has to be rammed firmly home. And to stop it flying out, tied down, nowadays with wire, but then with string and ingenious knots. It all looks quite different today. The principle is just the same, but one great labour and wine-saving device has come in. The upside-down bottles have their necks dunked in a freezing mixture that congeals the murky, yeasty part of the contents into a plug of ice. When the cork, nowadays a metal cap, is popped, the ice flies out like a bullet. A machine tops up the bottle, another rams in the cork, and another cages it with wire. Then the bottle is given a good rousing shake and sent on its way.
It's inebriating even to look at the outside of some of the mansions where champagne is made today. Once the formula had been perfected, its effect seems almost inevitable.
Champagne came to be identified with celebration as no other wine had been. It grew with the taste for luxury, and the taste for luxury grew with champagne. By the end of the 18th century, it had turned Reims and its neighbour Epernay into towns as prosperous as any in France. Epernay has its Champs-Élysées of Champagne, a street where every house is a mansion and a factory combined. The litany of brand names is like a roll call of celebration. Paul Roger, Bollinger, Krug, Roederer, Pommery, Perrier-Jouet, Heidsieck, Clicquot, Tétinger, Ruinart, de Castellane, Mercier, Marmont, Moet et Chandon. Most successful of all the merchants in this sparkling trade was Jean-Remy Moet, a friend and of course supplier to Napoleon and Josephine, for whom he built this elegant pavilion just for lunch. I imagine this transaction took place afterwards. Is the emperor reaching for his credit card?